Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about Microsoft 0 days. Read an article from SecurityWeek that discusses 6 of these CVEs that Microsoft is offering patches for. So the short story is there was an article on SecurityWeek. They report that Microsoft has issued warnings about 6 Windows security flaws that are actively being exploited. And these do have patches. They have not been patched by you yet, but there are patches available. Okay, so Microsoft issued the warning about actively exploited vulnerabilities. Some of the processes that they can allow attackers to do is they can execute code remotely, escalate privileges, bypass security features, and disclose sensitive information. So Windows is encouraging everyone to help take care of these vulnerabilities by using the patches and prioritizing these patching for these 6 vulnerabilities. All right, so here's the CVE table, and so I'm going to go through each one real quick. So CVE 38178 is a memory corruption vulnerability. It exists in Windows scripting engine, and it can allow remote code execution if a user clicks a malicious link, but only if the target is set up to use Edge in Internet Explorer mode. Okay, so CVE 38189 is a vulnerability in Microsoft Project, which can allow remote code execution if the user opens a malicious Microsoft Project file, but only if block macros from running in Office files from the Internet policy is disabled. That means it's allowed to happen. It's not going to block macros. And if VBA macro notification settings are not enabled. CVE 38107 is a privilege escalation vulnerability in Windows Power Dependency Coordinator. This can allow an attacker to gain system privileges. The source doesn't provide additional context about how this vulnerability might be exploited. All right, so I didn't mention the scores. So right now the scores are 7.5 and up. We have the next one is a 7.0, and that is CVE 38106, which is a Windows kernel elevation of privileges flaw. It exists, so this exists, and it can allow an attacker to gain system privileges. So now we have 2 vulnerabilities that allow system privileges. Exploiting this vulnerability successfully requires the attacker win a race condition. And so this means that they have to be able to do specific actions in a certain time frame or a very narrow time frame. CVE 38213 doesn't have a vulnerability score, but it allows the bypass of the Windows mark of the web security feature. This means an attacker can use this to bypass and get around the smart screen user experience, potentially making it easier to trick a user into opening a malicious file or visiting a malicious website. And finally, CVE 38193 is an elevation of privilege vulnerability. It exists in the Windows ancillary function driver for WinSock. So this can allow an attacker to gain system privileges. So now we have 3 system privileges. No further technical details on this one, and so no score for the last 2. All right, so what is a CVE? It's a common vulnerability enumeration. So basically it's a glossary, and so it just tells you, hey, this is kind of a spot for a list of all our vulnerabilities, and then we use a scoring system, which is they use the CVSS for scoring. And so the normal process for this when this occurs is, it'll go through an evaluation. They'll add it to the list, and then they'll share it, and then hopefully it gets listed in the MITRE glossary, and NIST, NVD from NIST will analyze and provide information as well. And that's the normal process. And so notice or be aware that NVD is not as current as it used to be, and there are some struggles right now maintaining that database. So please be careful and watch your normal other sources for information. So what is CVSS score? And so it's basically a common vulnerability scoring system. It's a numerical rating that reflects the severity of a security vulnerability. So it ranges from 0 to 10. You saw most of the ones that we mentioned today were between 7 and I think not quite 8. So they were in the high range, but not super high. And then the CVS score considers factors like how easy it is to exploit it, what's the potential impact, and whether authentication is required. So one of the ones that we talked about was 38178, and it has a CVS score of 7.5. It's a memory corruption vulnerability and exists in the Windows scripting engine, and it can allow remote code execution. This is the one where if you click on a malicious link, the target, you have to be using Edge, and it has to be capable of being used in Internet Explorer mode. Okay, so anyway, so this one is kind of important because the OnLab and South Korea's National Cybersecurity Center are suggesting this one may have been used in a national state APT compromise. So this is one that they know has been exploited already in the wild, and they're not saying too much, but you might be able to come across a few things and make some assumptions. Okay, so anyway, so it's a memory corruption vulnerability that exists in Windows scripting engine. It allows remote code execution if a user clicks on a malicious link, but only if the target is set up to use Edge in Internet Explorer mode. What's an elevation of privilege? That's the act of a user or application gaining higher levels of access or permissions than they normally are authorized to use. So what is memory corruption? This was the one we were just talking about. So this is a type of vulnerability where an attacker can alter memory in a way that was not intended by the program's design, potentially leading to arbitrary code execution. So if they can get hold of that, they can change it, they can modify it, and then they can take advantage of it. So what's a patch or a hot fix? This is a update that's released by the vendor, in this case Microsoft, to address security vulnerabilities or other bugs. Applying the patches obviously is important, and you do have to prioritize, and when you do patches, because you can't patch every single one every single day, but Microsoft is asking you to consider and maybe elevate these particular patches to help make sure you're secure and your company, organization, and your employees and customers are safe. So what is privilege escalation? The act of exploiting a vulnerability to gain higher levels of access or permission on a system than originally granted. Attackers often seek to escalate privileges to gain administrative control or access sensitive data. Okay, RCE, you hear this one a lot, is remote code execution. It's a vulnerability that allows an attacker to execute code on a vulnerable system from a remote location. So these vulnerabilities can have extreme consequences. They can give attackers control of your system. And they're doing it remotely, so you probably don't know where they're at. Okay, so what is Microsoft Project? This was one of the programs that's affected by the vulnerabilities, and basically it's just a software program for people who use project tracking, who need to take care of their projects, scheduling and planning and stuff. So privilege escalation, the process of exploiting a bug, design flaw, or configuration oversight in operating system or application to gain elevated access to resources that are normally protected. Windows kernel, this is the core component of Microsoft Windows. You may recall of hearing this during the CrowdStrike incident. So this is the operating system. This is a core component of the operating system, manages the system resources, and provides fundamental services to other parts of the system. So you want to protect this at all costs. Windows Power Dependency Coordinator. This is a service that coordinates power management across various system components and applications. Windows Scripting Engine is a component of Windows that enables the execution of scripts in various languages like Visual Basic Script and JavaScript or JScript. What's a zero-day exploitation or vulnerability? It's one that is unknown to the software vendor or the security researchers. Usually there's no patch for it. This particular one, I guess they called it a 0-day, but now it's not a 0-day anymore, but attackers are exploiting it according to the SecurityWeek article, and your systems can be compromised, and it's harder to protect you if you don't know that there are vulnerabilities out there until either the first researcher finds it or the first attack has been implemented. All right, so what are some mitigations? So patch, patch, patch. So when a company tells you to patch or prioritize those patching, take that seriously. Implement least privilege. So if someone does get into your system, not every user needs to have admin rights, and so this may contain or block them from getting into more important files or levels on your system. Strong passwords and multi-factor. email and web filtering always helps. You can't always get everything, but it is nice to have some of these programs in place, and intrusion detection is another good one, and awareness training, because you'll notice that most of these vulnerabilities, there was discussion about clicking on a malicious link or going to a malicious website. So if the user or a user is aware that there are constant threats out there, they may be a little bit more discreet and discriminating about what they click on, and that would help everybody in the long run. And so the credits really are a lot of the CVE records and Security Week for this one, and Meta and Playground for the images. So this is the one for the week. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hope you have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.